The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, episode 48.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everybody, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter, aka Father Fett, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we of course talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away, including the deeper themes and meanings. And so today we're discussing Season 2 of Star Wars Rebels, episodes 21 and 22, the Season 2 finale, Twilight of the Apprentice. And joining me on the panel today are, first up, we have Andrew Hermes. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Father. How's it going?
Going pretty well. Second up, we have Angela Cialana. Hey, Angela.
Hey, great to be back.
For us both. It's good to be back. This is the crew that we have tonight. Mike Creevy might make a surprise pop-in appearance, so stay tuned for that. But we're not counting on him because he has a couple of young kids. And Thomas is, of course, out because he just had a brand new baby as well. So, which is really awesome. But we're sad that they aren't able to talk about this awesome finale of season 2 with us. But we'll forge on without them. So before we jump into those episodes, first of all, we have a little bit of listener feedback that we get to talk about. So this is kind of exciting. In fact, it's I would classify it as fan mail, which was super exciting. Quite literally on the USPS, thing. It's labeled it's shipped to Father Fett, which was sort of legitimized my entire persona, which was great. So I have a letter here that I'm going to read, and then a gift that I have to show off to my co-hosts. And unfortunately, for those of you who can't see it, you just got to imagine it. So the letter goes as follows. Dear Secrets of Star Wars, my name is Ezra, and I live in California. I am 11 years old. My dad told me about your podcast when the new Clone Wars episodes were streaming on Disney+. I love your podcast. Keep doing them. Ezra. P.S. I 3D printed a couple of figurines for you guys. I hope you like them.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
So check these out.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So the first one that I'm showing off is a 3D print of Baby Yoda.
Wow.
Along the bottom of it, it says, "What you seek is seeking you." And Baby Yoda's got his his arm out like he's using the Force to stop the flames from engulfing the cantina back on Navarro. And so it's very clearly, it was printed, looks like in black plastic, and Ezra must have painted it for me. So it really, really, really cool. And of course, awesome. Baby Yoda would not be complete without Mando himself, Din Djarin. So again, a 3D print that's been painted. So very, very cool. Thank you so much, Ezra, for both of these. They are going to be the mascots of the show, more or less. So thank you for them. And watch the mail, because I'm going to be sending you a couple of Father Fett stickers and a wonderful note back. So watch for that. But thank you so much for the 3D prints and for the letter. So we greatly, greatly appreciate it.
For sure. So and cool. You have an awesome name, too.
Yeah.
Such a Star Wars name.
Yeah, right.
I figure Ezra Bridger must be named after you. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we should put those on social media, like on the SQPN Instagram or something. Yeah.
I will get some pictures sent off to Dom for that. And then we can share it with the listeners.
Absolutely.
So speaking of The Mandalorian, the little bit of news bits that I have relate to that, and I'm super excited because Star Wars announced that they are doing a Mandalorian publishing program, I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at that, but a number of novels and comics relating to The Mandalorian are going to be debuting. I can't remember if it was later this fall or if it's pushed into next year. I can't remember, but they're going to have a Art of the Mandalorian season 1 book. They're going to have a Del Rey full original novel. They're going to have an Ultimate Visual Guide, Allies and Enemies books, an 8x8 storybook, a junior novelization, and comics, of course. So I'm super excited about that. I think I'm most excited about the novel, but are you guys interested in those titles that are coming out?
Oh yeah, definitely the comics for sure. Yeah, I can't wait to, and the art book as well. Those are always good to have. Some nice coffee table books, to pop open. So definitely pumped for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And we get all these characters that, we've just now grown to love, and we get to see more about them and their environments and their costumes, hopefully, and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's even with everything kind of being delayed or shut down, they still got a lot of stuff coming out. So still a great time to be a Star Wars fan with lots more on the horizon. So let's jump into Twilight of the Apprentice, because these 2 episodes are just kind of chocked full of all sorts of stuff. So, of course, I throw it out to you guys first. What was I think I have to preface this. What were your initial impressions of the episode, if you remember it, because these debuted years ago, or in general, what are your impressions of these 2 episodes?
They're freaking awesome. I mean, it was, the long-awaited, encounter, obviously, between Ahsoka and Darth Vader. Something that we were hoping for and looking towards, and especially, since you asked about the initial reaction, obviously they were great. I think at the time when I was watching Rebels, I was like, these were probably the 2 best Rebels episodes at the time. To that point, and then watching them now in this context after going through Clone Wars again, and watching it through that lens, it's like much more of an emotional impact. As we're finding with almost all these episodes, right? So it just adds to it, especially with the 2 characters in question. And it's like the biggest maturation point or evolution of Ezra's character. And we get Maul back too, so that was a big deal, obviously. So Maul playing his games and back to his not really old ways, but this new Maul that's kind of playing both sides, right? So it's our first kind of real introduction to that. So that was huge, and it was great getting him back. And these episodes still they stand the test of time for me, and they even, like I said, hold more value now after going through Clone Wars again. So I was excited to watch these again.
Awesome.
Yeah, and for me, all the reasons that you said, Andrew, but this arc where these 2 episodes were such a swerve for the character development, for the plot. And I just remember feeling totally shook, like at the end of part 2, because of just so much change. And also just seeing a Sith temple. I mean, that was one of the coolest things ever. I don't know why. I guess just because, we had seen Jedi Temple before, but Sith Temple, there was so much mystery to it. And, the Sith, as far as like the ancient stories of the Sith, there really hadn't been that much canon about that, in the new canon or the rebooted canon. So, there's a lot that we'll get into, in our discussion that I just totally loved. And ever since the debut of these episodes, I've watched these episodes 20 times. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think for me, epic is kind of the word that I chose to describe it. But ironically, I found it more epic watching it yesterday again, rather than when I first watched it. And the reason for that is I hadn't gotten into the Clone Wars until after I had watched pretty much all of Rebels. So the emotional connection to Ahsoka was pretty low when I first watched it. So like I was rooting for her, but it wasn't quite the same stakes in my heart. And so watching it this time, it was like, yeah, I have a much greater depth of relation to Ahsoka and that relationship between her and Anakin. So that was just amplified for me. And then there was just so much with, I mean, of course, the lightsaber that Ezra finds that of course matches Kylo Ren. So they were already making connections to the sequel trilogy. But then even after seeing The Rise of Skywalker and Exegol, to have that same visual of this Sith temple and the dark world and the parallels there was also really impactful and exciting for me to delve back into it. So yeah, I think this was a really great one to go back to for sure. And yeah, let's kind of jump into the recap, because there's a lot going on. And so the finale of season 2 starts off immediately with Ezra, Kanan, and Ahsoka heading to Malachor, because as we had reviewed in our previous episode, Yoda had told Ezra to go there as a way to find knowledge on how to defeat the Inquisitors. And so we have this real touching moment between Ahsoka and Rex, as Rex is on a hologram and sort of lamenting that he's not with Ahsoka and he's concerned about her. And we have this very key dialogue between the two of them where they talk about, Rex says that he could have ordered Ahsoka to take him with her, and she says he doesn't outrank her. And Rex says that experience outranks everything. And then Ahsoka replies with, "Then I definitely outrank you." And for those of you who may not remember, that is almost a direct parallel to the moment that Rex and Ahsoka first met back in the Clone Wars movie. And the dialogue is very similar, except for the fact that Rex says the same thing: experience outranks everything. And Ahsoka more or less says something to the effect of, "Well, then I need to gain a bunch of experience." And that's kind of their initial meeting. So it was this sort of foreshadowing completion of the circle. And, and sort of there's almost like a foreboding, like Rex says, "May the Force be with you." And you almost sense that something bad is probably going to happen.
Well, and isn't this whole arc about having experience too? I mean, the experience of life and the fact that Ezra doesn't have much of that and sort of enables him to do certain things in these couple episodes. So I think that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, and I want to touch on it later too, but I'll mention it briefly here. But even Kanan's experience and his, he was knighted a Jedi Knight, and but even his maturity, where at one point, again, I'm jumping ahead, but in the second episode, he finally relents and trusts Ezra to go with Maul. And that's probably not something he would have done, in season 1. And so even his own maturity, and of course, Ahsoka has grown tremendously since the Clone Wars as well. So there's a lot of those themes running through it. So then they're still on the ship and they're approaching Malachor, and Ezra wants to know why Malachor was off limits, and Ahsoka says the wonderful line of, "There's always a bit of truth in legends," and there were all these legends of Malachor and heavy with the dark side, and of course they're going there because they assume that there's something on Malachor to help them. And I do want to point out that. In the Legends universe, and I suspect Thomas would know this as well, but did any of you ever play the Knights of the Old Republic video games?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay. I played the very first one on the original Xbox. Yeah.
So this is going to sort of relate. In Knights of the Old Republic 2, Malachor shows up, and it shows up as this world that was devastated during the Mandalorian Wars, again, all in Legends, but it was a world that was cracked and twisted, and it was a wasteland covered with jagged cliffs and constant lightning storms, and it was just imbued with the dark side. So it's really interesting that Malachor, it's the same exact name. This is one of the things that they were able to kind of tweak and pull into canon, and it's still a place of the dark side, and there's a Sith temple, but it's not quite the same as the Malachor that you see in Knights of the Old Republic. But it's just kind of funny that's when Ahsoka says, there's always a little bit of truth in Legends, and almost like a wink wink, for you Legends fans out there. So that's a cool connection. They do arrive on the planet, and Chopper detects another ship and tries to track it. They set down and they see these foreboding stone pillars with they're writing with the old tongue on the pillars that Ahsoka can make out just a few words on. I was trying to rack my brains, and I didn't know what she quite meant by the old tongue. I didn't know if she meant the Sith, like the ancient Sith language, but Ahsoka knew a few words, but
it wasn't really clear. I don't know why the Jedi would have trained her to speak the old tongue of the Sith. So it may have just been a common old tongue that was used a long time ago. I don't know.
Either way, it was really imbued with the dark side. So
that's for sure.
I was just gonna say seeing the landscape again. Even those pillars, those type of structures were also in Rise of Skywalker, right?
Yeah, it looks very familiar from Rise of Skywalker. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it just took me back to seeing. I just remember, like, because I had seen these episodes of Rebels that Rise of Skywalker starts, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm like freaking out in my seat, and everyone around me is like just fine, and I'm just like, it's a Sith temple, it's so amazing. Yeah.
And it's and I love the visuals that they do, because with Exegol and with Malachor, the Sith temple is not on the surface, but you have to like break through the crust and go down into the darkness. Whereas
it's almost like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And then, but conversely, the Jedi temple, like on Lothal, rises out of the ground and it extends upward. So you have this visual separation between the two, the light and the dark, the up and the down. Because really on the surface, Malachor just looks like there's just these random pillars and in a crater, and that's kind of all you see. But we very quickly find out that there's the whole iceberg under the surface. Because Ezra is drawn to this pillar and has to touch it, of course. Why not? And it lights up red, and they fall through the crust of this crater, and that's when they have this impressive view of the Sith temple, this ominous red light, and dare I say beautiful. I mean, yeah.
Let's be real.
Yep. So they fall down, and Chopper, of course, warns them too late that they might break through the surface, but that's Chopper for you. And they as they're down there, they encounter this battleground, and that's where Ezra finds that green lightsaber that very much looks like Kylo Ren's. It's a crossguard lightsaber. It's a relic of eons past, and in fact, the Wikipedia article connects it directly to the great scourge of Malachor, which the result that they see, the battle that they see in front of them, has to be the end result of the scourge of Malachor, where there was a Jedi Knights who attacked the temple, and ultimately Ahsoka concludes that absolutely nobody won that particular battle.
So because of the way that the, I guess, I don't know, mummies or whatever, like, are positioned, like they're in battle, almost like they were just frozen in time. Sort of reminded me of like Pompeii or something, like especially because of, the shape of the temple being sort of like a cone or a volcano. And then that kind of brings you back to like Lord of the Rings and, Sauron and all kinds of stuff. So I think that's all sort of tied in because I know Dave Filoni is informed by Lord of the Rings and Tolkien kind of as well for that. So, I thought that was interesting. There's a lot of ancient civilizations that sort of have ties to, something like that, almost even the Forbidden City. Am I getting that right? Like the Chinese army, the terracotta soldiers that are kind of like underground or whatever, or hit or sort of to, I think, protect the emperor's grave. Is that what it is? I don't know. I'm a little bit ignorant on that. Maybe somebody can fill us in, but it reminded me of that
right.
too.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, my suspicion, at least with this with the battle there, is I wondered if the spoiler alert, the battle station that is the temple was the event that caused the death and destruction, because they were just the frozen people were sort of just mid battle when they find them. It would sort of make sense that that's exactly how they all died, but that's not really ever explained. So just adds a little bit of mystery to the whole and ominous nature of the world. So after they find this and they see the lightsaber, we get to meet a new Inquisitor, the eighth brother. Probably the least experienced out of the Inquisitors, but he shows up and attacks him. And of course, Ezra falls through another surface and down below, and he's unable to follow. So Ahsoka and Kanan give chase to the eighth brother. And the eighth brother uses his spinning double-bladed lightsaber as a helicopter of sorts and flies away.
I know some people hated that, but I didn't mind it too much. I thought it was kind of like, well, the Inquisitors are sort of pawns in this whole game, and it's sort of like a machine, with the Empire and everything. So I kind of took it that way.
Yeah, I remember only hating it because I'm like, why don't like other Jedi like use this trick? Like why? How come it's always like these cool like characters like the Inquisitors that like they're the only ones that like use these sort of special like dark side or powers and something that Jedi could totally do because it looks like they just have their lightsabers fashioned that way. So why can't other Jedi do it and be cool like that? Like they always have to. It always seems like they're always like jumping and almost falling even when they force jump, or whenever they fall through a hole, which they seem to do all the time. Why can't they just have like these cool lightsabers where they can just save themselves? That's the only reason why I hated them.
I guess it's kind of weird because lightsabers are a piece of technology in and of themselves, but I kind of think that it has to do with the technology piece, that like the dark side is sort of more artificial and not natural, whereas the Jedi and the light side is supposed to be more like natural and just, I don't know what exactly is the word that I'm looking for, but you kind of, you get the idea. So I think that's why.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like Jedi could be techie every now and again. They could get it cool.
It definitely wouldn't.
Like that.
It wouldn't go against the Jedi Code, because it's just they'd be using the lightsabers as a tool, not as like a means to destroy or something.
Right.
Yeah. It would have saved all sorts of problems. But I was ultimately perfectly fine with it, because I very much look at Star Wars as I would sort of call it science fantasy, not science fiction. Where Star Trek is more along the lines of like, let's try to see what, the limits of actual technology in the future, and Star Wars is very much more whimsical and magical. And so that part of me is like, they can fly, of course they can. That's fine. So they fly away, and Kanan and Ahsoka give chase, and Ezra encounters an old man. And of course, we had been expecting this encounter for years by this point. Did you guys notice? I had to read a commentator point this out, but Ezra encounters, of course, this old man, and he's Darth Maul. But immediately there is you see a parallel between Maul's dialogue with Ezra and Yoda's dialogue with Luke Skywalker in The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, yeah. I noticed that right away.
So, like, Ezra points his lightsaber at Maul, and Maul says, please put away your weapon. I mean you no harm. Yoda says roughly the same thing to Luke. Away with your weapon. I mean you no harm. And, they both ask the question, why are you here? And Ezra, of course, is seeking knowledge, and Luke is seeking Yoda. And I thought that was a very fitting parallel, because the whole arc of these two episodes is Maul trying to get Ezra to be his apprentice. And Yoda, of course, takes Luke on as his apprentice. So there's clearly this parallel between the two, which I thought was a really cool thing to for me to have pointed out to me, because I wasn't picking up on it. But so we encounter Maul, and apparently he's been living there for years alone, and his ship crashed. And I just mentally, I was trying to put this in the time frame. So this would have been at some point after his time in charge of the crime syndicates that we see in Solo. So at some point he...
Yeah, I mean, he's a little wrinkly at this point, so...
yeah. So he offers to help Ezra get back to his friends, and we see that Ezra is very skeptical of him at first, but when he offers to get him the knowledge that he seeks, that's when Ezra is willing to go to Maul.
And Maul he learns Ezra's pain point during this conversation, which is very foolish of Ezra to just to expose that.
Yep.
It clearly shows that he's immature, and he'll just share with anybody. He'll just immediately, tell somebody what is, he just be vulnerable with them. And of course, Maul uses that, right? Just like any dark side user.
I think that if there's anything you can count on, is you can count on Maul to be manipulative.
Yes.
However it suits him best, whether it's towards Ezra or towards Kanan and Ahsoka, whoever. Just to point out at this point, there was a real cool visual cue too, that when Ezra fell through that hole, he was bathed in an ray of light. And when he decides to go actually engage Maul in dialogue, he has to step out of the light into the darkness to go talk to him. So real cool visual stuff going on there. Because Maul is at that point exactly working his manipulative attitude on Ezra, and promising him to help him gain that knowledge that Ezra is looking for. Maul knows the secret way to get inside the temple, but he's too old to open the door. And Ezra is still suspicious, but as an attempt to get to know each other, they exchange their names, which I thought was really funny. And Maul says, call me Old Master, and Ezra says, call me Jabba. And my brain immediately went to, I think it was Civil War, Captain America Civil War, where Spider-Man meets Captain America. I forget who he meets, but he's like,
it was Captain America.
We're using our made-up names now? I'm Spider-Man, and it's like, because obviously...
Oh, yeah, that was Ant-Man.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was Ant-Man,
Yep. But still, like, Ezra needed to be a little bit more creative. Jabba, of course, he didn't know Maul, but Maul would have obviously known who Jabba was.
Yeah.
But I thought that was funny. So Ezra follows Maul towards the temple, and Kanan and Ahsoka continue to chase the Inquisitor. And Kanan makes the very fun point that he's never had an Inquisitor run from him before. And so they were able to deduce that they were not the ones that he was hunting, but that they sort of came as a surprise, and they have no idea who he is actually hunting. And Maul and Ezra continue to head towards the temple, and we get a little bit more dialogue there as well. That Maul tells Ezra that the Inquisitors are his enemy as well, and so Ezra immediately assumes that Maul was a Jedi then, and asks him about that. And Maul tells him no, but that he was a Force wielder. And Ezra, again in his kind of naivete, assumes then that he was a Sith. And there Maul actually is speaking a little bit of truth there, because he is revealing his own motives for what he's doing, because he tells Ezra that the Sith took everything from him. They ripped him from his mother's arms, they murdered his brother, they used me as a weapon, and then they cast me aside. Which I thought was a very fitting tie to what we saw happen in the Siege of Mandalore in the Clone Wars. We have that same sort of dialogue where Maul recognizes that he was just cast aside, and that's why he was trying to get Anakin to come to Mandalore and kill him, which didn't happen. But at the same time, he's being truthful. He's also being manipulative, because that's exactly then how Ezra can relate to him, because Ezra says the Empire took his home and his parents away. And Maul immediately asks him if he wants revenge. And Ezra responds with that he wants justice. Mm-hmm. And Maul, rather than push him on that, completely accepts it, but again is sort of trying to twist it into the anger-filled revenge that ultimately would lead him down that dark path. And we jump then to Chopper, who, this was a really great moment for Chopper. Almost made me want to stand up and applaud. But Chopper finds the Inquisitor's TIE fighter, and he hops into the cockpit of this TIE fighter and controls it, and manages to shoot at the Inquisitor who's approaching, and Kanan and Ahsoka are approaching behind, and Chopper's the one who knocks out the Inquisitor. Mm-hmm. Which is really cool. Good for him. So I think that also just reveals the inexperience of the eighth brother. Mm-hmm. I think he's kind of new to the scene, but
he's the eighth brother,
right?
It's not the first or the second brother,
right? In fact, I don't. Yeah, we encounter the fifth brother and the seventh sister, but yeah. But it allows Kanan and Ezra to capture him and try to question him. And meanwhile, Maul and Ezra get to the temple, and this was a really interesting interplay here, because the rule of two of the Sith really comes into play, both at the entrance of the temple, but also kind of throughout these episodes, which I thought was a really cool thing for them to bring in, because this is a Sith temple. But in order to get into this temple, they have to lift these stone blocks blocking the entrance. But they're heavy enough that only one person can lift one stone at a time. So it takes two people to kind of lift one, and then the other lift the next block, and they can kind of migrate in going under these stone blocks. But you have to use your passion, you have to use your anger in order to lift these stones, which Maul is able to convince Ezra to do. Yeah,
and I totally was thinking, what would Father Fett say? Because, it's this conversation of, to defeat the dark side, you have to know the dark side. But the dark side goes a step further and says you have to use the dark side.
Yep.
So I was just thinking about, what are the theological implications of that?
Definitely. Long story short, it's definitely immoral. I mean, basically, the ends don't justify the means. So Ezra is seeking knowledge, and I mean, he's using the dark side in order to get to that end. but doing something wrong, even if you have a good intention, is always wrong. Period. And so, yeah, Ezra's young and immature, and being misled by this. In fact, and he knows it too, because he tells Kanan that my master wouldn't approve of that last part. You have to practice their beliefs. It's one thing to know about something, but it's a completely different thing to engage in their beliefs when you know them to be contrary to what's right. So Ezra is, but he knows enough, so he's culpable for sure, but he's still allowing himself to be swayed by Maul.
What's funny is that, like, he probably thought, like, oh, is this one of these doors? And then there was like a bunch of them. He's like, oh, there's how many of these are there? So
that's a great analogy. For like you make that one. You're like, okay, I'm going to do this just this one time. And then there's more things ahead of you in your path that you have to keep on, getting further and further into your lie or whatever it is. So yeah, that's a great analogy.
Exactly, yeah.
It's that same idea that if you're on the road of living the Catholic life as you should, think of it as a straight, road. And if at this point I'm going to say, okay, it's okay for me to give in just this once, and you turn off that road just a little bit, and the farther and farther you go down that other path, it continues to go farther and farther and farther away from the true path, the good path, the moral path. Go ahead.
Oh, is that kind of why Jesus says the path is wide that leads to I don't know, what does he say? Death or
destruction, or ultimately hell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the road to life is narrow. And it takes immense discipline and grace. And of course we couldn't do it without God's grace. But to stay on that narrow path is the only one that leads to fulfillment. So even though Ezra is trying to bend the rules a little bit, it's not going to turn out well for him.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I think he's not mature enough to realize that, and he's allowing himself to be swayed by Maul. But I also want to point out there that, in fact, I want to jump into this because this relates to that. Anger itself is not wrong. So Maul tells him to give in to his anger, but he wants to direct it towards something destructive, which is wrong. That's where you get into wrath and vengefulness, and those, of course, are immoral. But the emotions themselves are completely normal and natural and built into who we are as humans. But it's how we respond to them that is either good or bad. So anger can lead to righteous anger, which Jesus himself had when he chased the money changers out of the temple. And it can lead us into doing something that will fix a bad situation, or to bring justice to a situation that needs it, or to remedy something that needs fixing. But the dark side is always, use that to be dominant, to be destructive, to be, to be the most powerful and hurt others. And so I throw that out there because it's at this point that Maul almost quotes the Sith Code to Ezra. He says, he tells Ezra, your passions give you strength, and through strength you gain power. You have seen it, you feel it, you must break your chains. And so I pulled up the actual Sith Code, which originated in
as one does.
Right. It's on the shelf below all the Catholic theology. It's but it originated, I'm pretty sure it originated in Knights of the Old Republic 1. But it was made canon in the Altar of Mortis episode, so the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars. And the Sith Code says the following: peace is a lie, there is only passion. Through passion I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall set me free. And so that's the Sith way. That's, and it's passion leads to strength, to power, to victory, but it's all in that goal of being dominant and ultimately fueled by pride. But then conversely, you have the Jedi Code. So I pulled up the Jedi Code, right next to the Sith Code. And the Jedi Code says, there is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. And so I just think that both of these are problematic. And, it really bothers me that the Jedi Code tries to basically say you can't act out of emotion. There is no emotion, there is no passion. That's very problematic because it's a denial of the humanity of everyone, or the personhood of the alien species or whoever. And what that ends up doing is, if you try to live out of that, you end up trying to just repress your emotions and ignore them and not handle them appropriately and deal with them appropriately. Where the emotions, love and anger and all of those, how you deal with them determines, whether or not you're on that narrow path or you're going off that path and doing something wrong and immoral. And so I sort of look at the Sith Code and the Jedi Code as sort of both ends of the extreme, and that the balance of the two should be, what is good and moral. In fact, I think that's perhaps why Ahsoka maybe speaks to so many of us, because she tries to navigate the path. She's not a Jedi, and she makes that very, very clear. But she's not Sith, and so she kind of wades into that area between the two. And I think that's exactly where we need to be. We can't be on either extreme, and that's where we find problems. So,
yes, we could almost have like a whole nother episode on just that topic. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll add that to our list of potential future episodes too. So,
cool.
I don't know if you guys had any random thoughts on that before we continue.
Just that, that's probably my least favorite thing about Star Wars, that the Jedi Code does say that, and that basically the main big Jedi sort of promote that concept of getting rid of your emotions, which is not Christian, but it does come from other religious practices that I'm sure George Lucas pulled from. Mm-hmm. So, but I think, as we get further into the canon, the Star Wars canon, we see sort of a development, as you were saying, like Ahsoka, but then also Rey and even Obi-Wan to a certain extent.
I would also throw Qui-Gon into that.
Yes, yep. Qui-Gon as well.
Mm-hmm.
That they try to, find that balance and be more human in a way.
Yep.
Yeah, as you were saying.
Yep.
Yeah. I think Star Wars, that's something I've obviously never, you can't fully agree with the Jedi Code because of that, and always turn me off. But Star Wars shows that no one can really live by those rules, and it just doesn't work. So, at least in almost all Star Wars properties, it shows like how it's not really practical or reasonable, or even moral to live that way. You have to be human, like you said, and even though there's flaws that come with that, it's better than trying to abide by a code that just goes against our nature.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the awesome things that Star Wars does, is it does present both of those, and it does a really good job of presenting the problems with both of those. Anakin, very specifically, Anakin was trying to live out the Jedi Code, but he didn't have a healthy understanding, and he didn't deal with his emotions appropriately, which led him to, fear. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And he falls into that and becomes Darth Vader because of that. Mm-hmm. But had the Jedi had a more holistic understanding and philosophy regarding all of that, they could have actually helped him deal with the loss of his mom and the fear of losing those he loved. But instead, it was all sort of, there is no passion, there is no emotion, and he didn't have any healthy ways to understand that and deal with it. So, which leads him, unfortunately, to his fateful encounter with Ahsoka, which we're going towards. But back to the temple. Listeners, if you have any other thoughts and opinions and anything at all regarding the Jedi Code and the Sith Code, please send us some feedback, and we'd love to take that and dive a little bit deeper into that, perhaps in a future episode. So send us your thoughts as well. But back at the temple on Malachor, Ezra and Maul both make it into the center of this temple. And Ezra at that point finally reveals his name to Maul. Like, why? Okay.
Because he's getting comfortable.
Trust.
He's way too trusting. But then Maul reveals his name, and another thing that was pointed out to me, it's at this point then that Maul actually pulls back his hood and his full face is revealed, is when he reveals his name to Ezra. And they make it into that center of the temple. They encounter the key. It's the Sith holocron that Maul has been after, and it's where Ezra thinks he will find the knowledge that he seeks. And between them and the holocron is this chasm. And Maul says that only someone willing to risk oblivion is worthy to claim it. And again, Ezra, why? He decides to trust Maul and says that he will jump, and that Maul just has to use the Force to push him across the chasm.
Again, perfect opportunity to have the helicopter lightsaber.
Yes.
Okay? Even though this is not the time to use it, but he could have, instead of having to trust Maul to do it, he could have just done it with a lightsaber.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
We're going to ignore that. We're going to just put that aside. We're going to think about the principle of two people working together. Master and apprentice. Yeah.
But
it's kind of backwards, because Ezra says, "Throw me," because he says his master always says that. So it's like, he's sort of giving into this, what Maul really wants, which is an apprentice, right? And so he wants to turn Ezra into his apprentice, and all of a sudden now he's doing this thing that he would normally do with his master with Maul. So
yeah, I was gonna bring this up later, but I'll bring it up now. Is I totally was picking up, like, I looked at Maul like the cool rebellious uncle that, as a kid you want to hang out with because he's cool and he's, edgy or whatever, but like your dad says no, and your dad is kind of the boring one and the one laying down the law. And I kind of picked up that between Ezra, Maul, and Kanan, that Kanan is very much in the next episode, even they're talking, and Kanan tries to point out to Ezra how Maul is manipulating him, and Ezra just doesn't want to believe it. He wants to go hang out with Maul. And so I just kind of saw that dynamic happening, and Maul, but again, it's Maul is totally just manipulating him, telling him what he wants to hear, and trying to sucker him in. Kanan, of course, knows that, but Ezra is too naive to see that. So we'll get to that. That's still coming up. But he does throw Ezra across the chasm, and the trust was warranted for that little activity. So he retrieves the holocron, and it activates the temple, of course. He is on this stand that starts rising, and of course he has to jump off of the stand and trust Maul again. And there was a point there where he does end up jumping off and into the chasm again, and Maul catches him with the Force. But it very much looked like to me that Maul caught the holocron with the Force, and that Ezra was just hanging on to the holocron.
Mm-hmm.
And for a split second, you almost think Maul is just going to let Ezra fall.
Yep.
But he doesn't. And
again with the ring and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Kanan and Ahsoka see the temple light up, and Kanan is very much the dad here. He goes, why do I know Ezra's involved in this somehow? And, and so they go off in search of him. They make it to the front of the temple, and they have the two other Inquisitors that we already know show up. So the fifth brother and the seventh sister. And Maul uses the holocron inside to open the doors of the temple, and they walk out front, and they are met with this battle between Kanan and Ahsoka and the Inquisitors. And that part of the two-part finale ends with Maul cackling and summarizing the entire event as "what fun," which was very appropriate of Maul to say. Part 2, of course, picks up right where that one left off, and Ezra tries to convince Kanan to trust Maul, even though Ahsoka and Kanan both sort of... Ahsoka knows Maul, but Kanan... I don't think Kanan has ever met Maul at this point, but probably knows of him. Maul decides to show Kanan his trustworthiness and begins to fight the Inquisitors. And the Inquisitors realize that Maul must know about the artifact, which is the holocron, and so they all join in the fight. And the Inquisitors recognize that they are outmatched, and they retreat. And then we have an interaction between Ahsoka and Maul, and Ahsoka asks Maul what game he's playing, and he says that he's playing the end game. And so this was interesting. I was doing some reading on people commenting on these episodes, and to refresh your guys' memory, these episodes were released prior to any inkling that season 7 of the Clone Wars was going to be done. So in this particular scene, Ahsoka interacts with Maul as if she knows him, but we had never seen Ahsoka encounter Maul at all in the Clone Wars yet.
Right.
So this was just an interesting kind of dynamic to play out, because Dave Filoni, during one of the Q&A sessions that he was doing with these episodes, made reference to the Siege of Mandalore, and that they had met in the Siege of Mandalore, even though it hadn't been shown yet on the Clone Wars. So we, of course, have seen them and are able to kind of piece that all together.
Yeah. So now we can understand the knowing tone that Ahsoka has when she's talking to Maul. And I remember the first time that I heard kind of that tone in her voice, I was like, well, how does she know him so well, And now, of course, we know.
Yep.
And the other thing, too, that I wanted to mention about that kind of ties to what we know now is that the Inquisitors kept calling Maul the Shadow.
Yep.
In this episode. And of course, we know that Maul is in charge of the Shadow Collective, and we've seen a lot of that now. So I guess, you wonder, like, how much of this stuff do they have everything like planned out in advance? So yeah, it's cool how they do that.
I want to see like a visualization of Pablo Hidalgo's brain, because he's part of the story group, and he is like a walking encyclopedia, and probably can visualize all of these things and the random the shadow reference, or all of these sorts of things. And I need someone to spill it out for me, and then I can follow it. But so there's a ton there. So Maul does have that. He tries to convince Kanan and Ahsoka that he's trustworthy to work with them. The enemy he is the enemy of their enemy. And so he has his own reasons for wanting the Empire to fall, which he kind of laid out in the Siege of Mandalore, that, he felt cast aside and wants Vader and the Emperor to be taken down, and revenge there as well. And so Maul knows that Vader is coming. He says that, 2 Jedi and a part-timer, in reference to Ahsoka, Vader wouldn't be able to resist coming for them. And Ezra continues to argue that they should trust Maul, shows them the holocron, and Ahsoka points out that no Jedi can unlock it. But Maul says that the holocron can still unlock the temple by placing it in the obelisk at the top of the temple. And that, of course, it'll unlock the ancient knowledge of the Sith, which is still completely bogus.
Well, not completely. I mean, because when they do end up unlocking it, then you hear that Mother Talzin voice, that says knowledge is power, right? So he's kind of telling half-truths at this point.
Yeah. Did you notice that the voice of the Presence, once he does put the holocron in, that's the same actor who does the voice of Ventress?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
cool.
So there's some. I think Filoni was even talking about how there's certain voices that might kind of echo through the eons of the Sith, or so that particular voice, maybe coincidental, maybe not, was an embodiment of the dark side there. So they decide. Well, Kanan wants to leave. Ezra wants to stay, of course, and Maul manages to convince the group to stay because it's their best chance of defeating Vader and the Inquisitors. And so Kanan relents, and they decide to stay and help. So they begin to lead up to the top of the temple. The Inquisitors spy on them and realize that they have the holocron, and the eighth brother kind of again goes impulsively to go and to try to retrieve it. And then we have another real cool rule of two sort of situation happening on the side of the temple, because Maul brings them to this lift that can only carry two at a time. And it was that was funny, because Ezra and Maul get onto the lift, and Kanan looks at Maul and says, these two come as a set, and asks Ahsoka if she's okay riding up with Grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And it's on the lift there that I was mentioning earlier that Kanan tries to tell Ezra how Maul is manipulating him, and Ezra just feels that Kanan doesn't trust him to make decisions for himself.
And we get foreshadowing, too, with Ezra saying, Maul sees what I could be, you don't. So it's this concept that Kanan can't see something. And of course, we know what happens later on.
That's
nice catch.
Yeah. That was such a tragic moment. But we'll get to it because there's more to say there. So once they get to the top, the eighth brother shows up and almost knocks Ezra off the side of the temple. There's a lot of almost falling off, or actually indeed falling off of this temple. But Ezra is saved as Maul arrives and pushes the eighth brother off the edge of the temple. What is it with Star Wars and like high ledges and big falls and chasms and super weapons?
Mm-hmm.
It's all here.
The high ground.
True. Oh. So the encounter with that particular Inquisitor lets Maul know that the Inquisitors are onto them, and so they decide to split up. Splitting up is never a good idea. Why split up? But they do. But Maul goes with Ezra, and this was a growing point, I think, for Kanan, because he's talking to Ahsoka a little bit about it, and Ahsoka says, they'll be fine. And Kanan asks, how do you know? And Ahsoka says, because you taught him. And Kanan is able to let Ezra go, trusting that he will follow his teaching and do the right thing. So that was a good character moment for Kanan. Even though we all know that Ezra is still immature and naive, and we're not sure how he's going to act. Because meanwhile, as Maul and Ezra are going up, he continues to try to teach him how to act like a Sith. He tells him that the dark side fights without mercy, without remorse. And in order to be victorious, he has to find that strength within him, which is totally wrong. Fighting without mercy, without remorse is not strength, but that's what Maul is pointing out as strength.
And he also puts the emphasis on you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the word you is constantly, it's all about you, you know, your gift, and you were given this, and your strength and your power. And so, yeah, you see that that contrast between the dark side and the light side, where the light side's always concerned about the other, right? And protecting and defending, whereas the dark side is about me and what I want and having power for myself.
Mm-hmm. And then he uses those exact same sorts of attitudes of the dark side when the seventh sister shows up, and he uses the forced chokehold on her and encourages Ezra to kill her in his anger. And Ezra thankfully hesitates and doesn't, and then Maul immediately throws his lightsaber at her, killing her. And then he uses that moment, even though Ezra failed in striking her down in anger, Maul then uses that moment to tell Ezra that if he hesitates like that again, it could cost him his life, and then he drives it further, or the life of his friends. Again, pointing Ezra down that road of fear of losing his friends, which will lead him down that road of giving into his anger and taking the power for himself, which is actually what would cause him to lose his friends, but that's not what Maul is telling him. So they approach the top, and Maul definitely senses Vader's approach and knows that time is running out. And so Ezra is sent to the top to put the holocron in while Maul goes to fight the remaining Inquisitors. And he's pretty nimble for an old guy, because he
right?
He manages to take out both the fifth brother and he damages the eighth brother's lightsaber. And this is the one downfall to the helicopter lightsabers.
Yes.
Yeah. He tries to escape, and it breaks, and he plummets to his death, we assume. And then it's at that exact moment that Maul so Kanan and Ahsoka, I think, are both there. I know Kanan at least is there, but Maul then explicitly refers to Ezra as his apprentice, and turns on Kanan and strikes him and blinds him. What was your guys' reaction to that?
Total surprise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it changes Kanan's whole character from this point on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember watching it the first time. I was like, yeah, Rebels has not really, up to that point, you know, delved into this type of territory, like you mentioned in the beginning, where there's such a turn for a character. And we see turns for multiple characters, you know, in these episodes. Yeah, shocking is the word for it. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
it's a really big jump, and it kind of sets a new precedent, you know, for the show moving forward, and what to expect from it, and what not to expect, right? So,
yep.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and watching it again, you know, brought back a lot of those same feelings, and realizing how far Star Wars has come, you know, with you know, as far as their animated, you know, series are concerned, and how they've kind of risen up to the quality and arguably even higher quality than a lot of the films. So it's I think this season finale of season 2 is kind of one of the things you can point to where Star Wars kind of achieved that.
I think from a storytelling perspective, it was a great thing to do, because I mean, you know that Rebels, I think we knew that season 3 was already coming, and so you don't expect the main characters to get killed off. But then if you know that none of the main characters are going to die, where's the stakes?
Mm-hmm.
And so this really elevated the stakes to know that, okay, Kanan's not dead, but he is going to be permanently blinded and maimed because of this. And that, yeah, has drastic consequences to how he approaches everything. So I remember when I first watched it, I was very sad because I didn't want Kanan to be blind, but it definitely added some great ways for his character to grow. which was really cool to see for the next 2 seasons. And he is able to, of course, rely on his Jedi training because he was a Padawan in the temple, and they trained, to block the little droid blaster bolts blinded. And so he was able to rely on his use of the Force to, of course, fight Darth Maul and defeat him. So he manages to
pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a very intentional, that it was very clear that he could see more clearly when he totally was dependent on the Force rather than on himself, and informed by, distractions. And that kind of gives a launching pad to all of the character development that he goes through in the next, couple seasons, because of just, his reliance on the Force now.
Kanan's not one to trifle with. So, before though he defeats Maul, Maul does reveal to him that Ezra is activating the temple, which is a battle station, in order that Maul can exact his revenge on his enemies. So of course it's a super weapon, and it's Star Wars, and it's Sith, Ezra does reach the top. He puts the holocron in the obelisk, and that's when we have the Force presence, talking to him and telling him that knowledge is power. And once that happens, this lightning bolt lights up the sky. Again, I had flashbacks to Exegol, and the temple is beginning to be activated. And the presence tells Ezra that he has the power to destroy life now, which is a very scary
Freaks
thing.
him out.
Yeah.
Why, I didn't sign up for this.
He just wanted knowledge, but he didn't realize that knowledge is power, and power is the power to destroy life. So he has the good sense to recognize that this is not where he is called to go, and not what he should do. And finally admits that Maul has tricked them, and he tries to go back to tell Kanan and Ahsoka that, but somebody much more menacing arrives. Darth Vader. Did you guys find it a bit all I could think of was prideful and showing off that Darth Vader arrives by standing on top of his TIE fighter as it descends. Like the epitome of pride. It was cool.
As you said, Star Wars is whimsical, right?
Yeah.
That was a, how else could he make such an impressive entrance? He didn't have all of his stormtroopers with him. So just fly out of the sky like that.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of at the end of Rogue One, when he's standing at the at the door of the exit door of the ship, and any normal person would have just flown off and into the nothingness of space, but Darth Vader just kind of walked up to it and gave a menacing look at the ship. So it kind of reminded me of that exit, this whole entrance.
Well, and it's Darth Vader in his prime, if you can say that. I mean, like the Rogue One scene right before that, I was terrified of Darth Vader. And this is definitely Darth Vader prior to that. So he would have been in, tip-top shape as he could with all of the mechanics that he had. So he encounters Ezra, and Ezra is so cocky and arrogant. Darth Vader asks him, asked him how he unlocked the secrets of the temple, and Ezra just responds with, "You're smart, figure it out." And I would have been terrified to say something like that to Darth Vader. Like that would have just, I would have signed my own death warrant. And then but
it's still on point for Ezra, isn't it?
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah. He tells Darth Vader that he's not scared of him, and then Darth Vader says that, okay, you will die braver than most. And Vader destroys Ezra's lightsaber. That cool blaster lightsaber combo. But before Vader can fully strike him down, we have the fated encounter with Ahsoka.
It was foretold you would be here.
Yeah.
And I was like, who foretold that?
Good question.
You just have to assume
Palpatine?
everything's been foretold in Star Wars.
Yeah, I did wonder.
The fans foretold it.
Yes.
The fans did.
Yes.
That is the most accurate statement.
What do you guys think of this encounter?
Wow. I think, it was interesting, especially the way it all ended. I know we're about to get to the very end of this episode. I think, it was at the same time, like, very, satisfying and epic, and what everything you'd want it to be, but also there was a level of like, what the heck happened, like there's still so much mystery shrouded around, like we know up to this point, like in the movies, like Darth Vader, we know his whole arc with his redemption, and we know at this point he was far gone, but that little glimpse that we get, and the encounters and the dialogue between them, it shows a side of Darth Vader that we've never seen up to that point. So that was really, an amazing thing to see. And yeah, it's watching it again. It's like, wow, it's kind of, compared to the series finale of Clone Wars, it's like, there's so much there, and so much that there isn't, that we don't actually see, especially what's going on in their brains and in their hearts.
Yeah.
It's kind of just we're kind of just observers, and so are the other characters. Like Ezra has no idea the history that they have, and he's just kind of laying there, and we're kind of just like him. We're just kind of observing them, and it was, but all in all, it was great, and it was everything I hoped it would be and more.
Yeah, Dave Filoni said he played out this scene in his head for 10 years before this point, and I believe it because that's why we go back and watch it over and over again. I know when this first came out, I was just obsessed with this fight scene and the whole encounter, just watching it over and over again.
Well, and it's so cool to, I mean, you see the emotions, especially in Ahsoka, because she is convinced. I think she's convinced herself again that like Anakin isn't the one behind the mask, because he would never be as vile as Darth Vader was being, and again, well, and so Vader tells her that Anakin Skywalker was weak and that he destroyed him. And Ahsoka vows to avenge his death. And that's where we get the, revenge is not the Jedi way. And then Ahsoka adamantly saying, I am no Jedi. And their fight is really impressive. I mean, Ahsoka's a lot more.
Whoa, hold on.
Go ahead.
I can't let this slide. So I am no Jedi is like a direct Lord of the Rings parallel. Okay, because if you're not familiar with Lord of the Rings, there's this character, a female character called Eowyn, who faces the Witch King, who is like the worst evil villain that you could encounter, and he says, "No man can kill me," and she pulls off her helmet and says, "I am no man." So this is exactly like a direct parallel to that.
Those are awesome connections that I never would have picked up on.
It's awesome.
Yeah, there's so much here. The fight scene. Ahsoka is a lot more nimble than Vader. But what's awesome is we never see her in distress, or she holds her own very, very well.
Yeah.
Throughout that entire fight.
She force pushes Darth Vader. Like,
yeah,
that was
yeah.
I can't imagine anyone ever doing that. That was pretty epic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if she had picked up any of Anakin's fighting style in that fight or not, because she's still got to be playing that out in her mind. She suspects it's Anakin, but I think she's convinced herself it's not. But then at one point, as they're fighting, Vader pushes Ahsoka off the edge of the temple, of course. And meanwhile, Kanan and Ezra manage to remove the holocron. They have to do it together. Ezra couldn't do it by himself. A master and an apprentice were needed, and Kanan shows up and is able to help Ezra pull the holocron, so that way Vader can't use the battle station. And they manage to limp back towards the Phantom to leave. And Vader...
I just want to say it was really cute having Chopper walk him over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a cool entrance for him. Even though he was able to defeat Maul without any help, but he needed Chopper to walk over to Ezra.
yeah. Little bit of the compassion of Chopper.
Right.
Yeah. So they're trying to get back to the Phantom. Vader is trying to pull the holocron back from Ezra's grasp. And then we have the final confrontation between Ahsoka, who jumps in, force pushes Ezra back to the Phantom to let them escape. And she breaks a part of Vader's helmet, revealing part of his face. And we get Matt Lanter, his voice as Anakin, as he says Ahsoka. And it's at that moment that Ahsoka does realize that it's indeed Anakin behind the mask. And she vows to Anakin that she won't leave him, not this time. And Vader responds with the most heartless response ever. Then you will die.
This breaks your heart when you see that. And when you see her face as she hears him say her name, it's like, it reminds me of the story of Mary Magdalene hearing her name called by Jesus after he has died and rose again. Except this is like a twisted version of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so much history, so much emotion, so much shared life between the two of them. And yeah, it's exactly contrary to what Ahsoka would have hoped for. And the temple closes, leaving Vader and Ahsoka inside. And the temple explodes with this kind of force lightning. And Kanan and Ezra leave the planet with the holocron and without Ahsoka, of course. And they make it back to the Rebel base where the rest of the crew is waiting. And it's very, very somber. And Kanan is blind, of course, now, and no words are spoken, but you can feel the sorrow that's in the air because the assumption is that Ahsoka has been killed. We see Maul leaving Malachor in the Inquisitor's TIE Fighter, so we will see him another day.
Wheezing.
Oh, didn't catch that, but okay, right. Yeah. Vader walks out of the temple, and we see the Morai. Am I saying that right?
I think Morai is the name.
Okay.
I think it's called a convor.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
The type of creature is a convor.
Yeah, the name of that particular one is Morai. Yeah, that's right.
And that particular one is very connected to Ahsoka. So we've seen it at the end of the Clone Wars, and I think we've seen it elsewhere as well, but it's always in connection to Ahsoka. And then the very end scene ends with Ezra holding on to the Sith holocron, and it opens for him. And we heard earlier in the episode that only a Sith can open the holocron. Dun, dun, dun. So,
and I remember how freaked out everybody was after seeing that.
Yeah. I mean, and
the internet was, yeah.
They'd been teasing Ezra's fall to the dark side, I think, leading all the way up into that. And then so that does play out a little bit into season 3, but not nearly as drastically as what we feared it could be.
And it's kind of nuts too, because at the end of this, so when Ezra sees Ahsoka and Vader fighting, he says, "Oh, I need a lot more training." And so you think like, oh, okay, he finally gets it. And then, you know, he's like crying on the ship as they're leaving. And you think like, okay, penitent tears, like he feels bad for everything. And then you see him opening a Sith holocron at the end.
Well, and he could, I mean, we don't really know exactly what was going on through his mind, but if he would have been listening to the voice of Maul, he could be reacting out of that fear of losing Kanan, or any other member of the crew, and thinking that, yeah, he has to have the end justify the means.
Yeah, I think he really connected with Maul, more than maybe they even let on. Ezra kind of, up until that final scene, like you mentioned, Angela, we thought like, oh, he kind of came away, unscathed, not really influenced too much. But, everything how Maul mentioned how he came from a torn, background, and how Ezra did as well. And he related to that, and this sort of, power that he saw that came with anger and revenge, especially for saving loved ones, and I think that really appealed to him. And the thing with Maul, which is interesting, and I'd like to hear what you guys think about this, is I think the difference between a guy like Maul and like the Emperor, as far as their approach to luring people into the dark side, is I think Maul is a little more genuine. I think as far as like, yeah, he's selfish and he's ultimately he just wants what he wants, but I think Maul actually would have cared for Ezra, like in a somewhat awful way, but I think he would genuinely care for him as an apprentice, even though it would be as a Sith. But as far as the Emperor, though, I think he just lures people in for total selfish reasons and for ultimate power. He'll tease you with all these things with unlimited power, but I think with Maul, and we see hints of that in this episode, is really trusting Ezra and really letting him, be like, trying to feel him out and kind of just letting him be his own man in a way. Because, the example of that is like letting Ezra go up with the holocron himself. Even though Maul was probably confident that he would get back in time, he tells Ezra, like, go seek the knowledge that you find, and at that point, it's like, it didn't totally mean that Maul would get back to him. So I think I thought that was interesting, just thinking about that, how there's that big difference between Maul now that he's not tied to the Empire anymore, that even though he's still a Sith and using the dark side powers, I think he has more of an emotional edge to him.
I think we see more of Maul's humanity in general.
Yeah.
So yes, he's broken, and he's reacting out of that, and he's reacting out of the feelings of being cast aside, and he's out for revenge. But but he had a family, on Dathomir, and I mean, so we have. I would definitely agree with you. I think Maul's ability to care, even if it was a bit twisted, is a lot more than the Emperor's ability to care, because the Emperor, all that we see of him, and I don't know if there's any canon material like pre-episode 1, but even of kind of his own past, but all that we see of Emperor Palpatine is his absolute and total manipulation. The Clone Wars, he's manipulating both sides, and he doesn't care because it's serving his needs. Where Darth Maul, we can relate to him a little bit easier, because we can see his humanity and his brokenness and understand why he's doing what he's doing, and can get inside his head a little bit easier than the Emperor. So I would agree with you.
Yeah, and I would just say that ultimately Star Wars started off as a fairy tale, and that the Emperor is very much kind of the big boss main villain character, and you're really not going to get, I don't think we're ever going to get a backstory for Palpatine just because of that, because you don't really need that. And for exactly the reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah. He's an embodiment of the dark side. Any other final comments that we missed that you guys want to share before we wrap up?
Nope.
Okay.
Awesome couple episodes.
Yeah. This is quite the epic finale. So listeners, of course, definitely let us know what you thought of these episodes, and give us feedback, and we'll try to share those on the show. And if you have any other thoughts, opinions on the Jedi Code and the Sith Code, let us know that too, because we'll try to do a podcast on that in the future as well. You can email us or comment on our Facebook or Twitter page to give us any feedback you have. Our email is starwars@sqpn.com, and you can find StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, and on Twitter at SQPN. And so now, like always, we would like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Wars, including this week, Susan P., David S., Jared H., James M., and Richard V. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue this amazing podcast and all the other awesome podcasts that we create here at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Also, of course, please be sure to subscribe to the show, whether it's an Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on the SQPN YouTube channel. Just be sure to click the bell to receive notifications, and be sure to leave us a review, because that lets more people see our podcasts, and we can grow our audience. So please be sure to do that as well. You can also find all our previous episodes of The Secrets of Star Wars at sqpn.com/Star Wars. And we will be back in 2 weeks where we will continue to look at Star Wars Rebels, and we will be seeing more of Rex this time, and we're going to be reviewing Season 3, Episode 6, The Last Battle. So until then, Andrew Hermes, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Wars.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Father.
Absolutely. And Angela, thanks for joining us tonight as well.
It was great to be here.
And once again, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.